So I am a marriage and family therapist by training. I got my degree a very long time ago. And when I first started practicing as a therapist, my first population of interest was teenage girls and their families. And within about the first, I'd say 5 or 6 years of working with those girls, what I found was that there was this subset of them and their families that had this interesting blend of high intelligence, access to creativity, sometimes really challenging family situation, and pretty much all of them struggled with food, eating, or their bodies. Sometimes there was a family history of it, and sometimes there wasn't. But the thing that was most intriguing to me was that no one was helping those girls. So the existing support that was out there seemed to be kind of barely touching the complexity of what was lying underneath. And even though many of them were going along with things, it was like this whole body of them was left untouched. And at the time, I was a young clinician, and I was thinking mostly through the lens of psychology because that's what I was trained in, what I really believed in at the time. And about 3 or 5 years after starting, I got very ill myself with this illness that no one could figure out what it was about. And that took me on about a 5 year journey with alternative medicine, kinesiology, energy medicine, hormonal stuff, food, the whole deal, looking to understand why this set of symptoms seemed so incurable in me, and that everybody I went to see had a different idea about what was going on, but nobody seemed to be able to touch the thing. And like most of the people who come across my inbox or my talks, they know something about that. Like there's some sort of pattern or presentation that seems to be pernicious and somehow untouchable. So I started playing with that and using lots of alternative practices, including contemplative meditation practices, both Tibetan and Theravadan, and then also lots and lots of yogic practices. And my background was in both at the time. So in 2010, from what I had learned, I opened a clinic in Vermont, the Vermont Center for Integrative Therapy, and I endeavored to create a clinical model that basically took what I was learning with eating disorders and having some degree of success with and advance that into a model that would be good for everybody. I basically was like, if I take the most complex, hard to figure out thing and I can make it work somewhat, it can apply to everything that is less complex and it'll just kill it. So for 10 years, that's what we did. And during that time, I developed the model. I developed protocols for addiction, protocols for trauma, protocols for mood disorder, protocols for chronic pain, the whole deal. And we basically tested and played with that for 10 years with lots and lots of people. In the meantime, I had been in my own practices, mostly in Theravada Buddhism, and had been practicing pretty edgy and pretty hard for many, many years. And in 2015, I went on a silent meditation retreat, which was frequent for me. And I had what some people would call a massive awakening. But what really happened for me was that I had been sitting for about 5 hours in complete silence. And at some point, my awareness got super curious about what was in the silence. And when I asked on the inside, what's in the silence? I heard and saw, literally saw and perceived thousands of vibrating molecules of possibility. And in that instant, unbeknownst to me, I had become the silence. My awareness and my field had completely blended with that field of very fast moving possibility. And what followed after that was what I would kind of lightly call a descent and a wrestling with the two bodies that I'm going to talk about today that we really live with. One being what I call the field of existence or the field of possibility, and the other being this complex set of bodies that I usually refer to as the trauma body. So I spent the last 9 years unpacking all of this and playing with it with all of what I knew about my model before to kind of advance it even more. Unsurprisingly, over the last 10 years, I have seen hundreds of people who have struggled with spiritual awakenings, who have struggled with severe chronic illness and chronic pain, and of course, people who have struggled with very, very, very long-term addiction that does not seem to fully resolve. I started making maps and I started looking at what the actual energetic structure was between divinity or the what I want to say is like the untethered body, the free flowing creative fields, and that connection to the way that we are structured as humans because of oppressive systems. And when I speak about oppressive systems, you'll think about lots of different things. And it doesn't really matter where your thinking goes. The structure of them is almost always exactly the same replication. And what I found was that that structure was designed purposefully to restrict the free-flowing possibilities, the access to free-flowing love. It was basically harnessing this thing in many different ways and either occluding it, preventing it, resisting it, or full out blocking it. And so I started looking at the dance between those things and how we might be sourcing that sense of emergent possibility that is always present, even while we're stuck in horrific oppressive systems, whether those are external, internal, or both. Because the reality is, for all of us, there's a degree of both always. This has been entrained for so long that what is inside is also outside, and what is outside is also inside. The reality fields are mirroring each other all the time. And they're mirroring each other at such a deep fundamental level that most of the way the reality is produced within us is intrinsic and invisible. It is also deeply familiar. All of those things make it so that our perceptual abilities, which is how we are able to interpret the world, commune with the world, make decisions about ourselves and the world, are deeply distorted because of the way these systems have harnessed our energy bodies, our thoughts, our minds, our understanding, and our sense of possibility. So at the beginning, I really thought that this was going to be a clinical model because that was the world I had come out of. And it was the world I really thought was going to have the deepest influence in the future. But what I've come to understand is that this isn't so much a clinical model, although it has a clinical application. What it really is a fundamental relational model. It is a fundamental way to understand the way that we do, perceive, and interact in all relational fields. That is, again, with ourself and with the outside world. The thing that oppressive systems do the most is they harness the presence of love. And in my definition, love is not a feeling, it is a commodity. Love's expression comes through as all of the things that our base primal body has needs for: shelter, connection, food, touch, sensuality, sex, breath, ease. All of these things are part of how we are at a base level in need in order to do any of the other things that we try to do in life. If that primal body is occluded, interrupted, or baseline wounded, everything we do from there will have a ripple effect because of that interruption. If love is absent, if love is manipulation, if love is punishment, if love is control, if love is scarcity, if love is any of those things, when we are very, very young, we will intrinsically imbibe the messages and the understanding, and most important, the transactional structure of that in every cell of our being. And it will deeply inform and it will deeply distort the ways that we interpret love. This is why we can have massive amounts of love around us and feel unloved.
Mm.
It's why we can have massive possibility in front of us and feel like there is nowhere to turn. And I cannot in any way stress enough the potency of this, because what it will do is prevent us from actualizing our power. And what I mean by that is it will prevent us from moving in our life, from choosing, from using our voice, from authorizing for ourselves, from taking leadership and ownership that is not about leadership over, but it is intrinsic, that arises from within. You cannot unpack this shit in cognitive therapy. This is not just in your thoughts. This is in every remembered cell of your being. And although we call it all trauma now in the popular world, we don't go deep enough to really examine what we mean by that. And what I mean by that is that there is deep baseline multi-generational interruption to our connection and sourcing of love as the infinite source that we always have access to, and that we are, that we fundamentally are. Anything other than that is a lie. And we can idealize that, but having our bodies and every cell of our being know it requires a whole other path. If you have a high degree of access to creative energy, if that is natural to you, if it is part of your lineage, if it is part of the way you are wired, you will be way more vulnerable to the way that that creative energy gets harnessed and the addictive looping that is a result of that, the chasing, the withholding, the competing, the power struggle. Why? because your sensitivity is heightened, but also because your desire for the thing that you know is honestly and truly cleanly yours will be very rooted in you. And it will be hard to stop until you get it. It will feel like you can't accept the replacements, and you and everything around you will attempt to create the replacements. And all of those attempts at replacement, as everybody in here knows, will not be enough. You will be deeply unsatisfied. And in that lack of satisfaction, it will drive you either further into that hole and or further into seeking the remediation of that. And part of the difficulty we have right now is that the remediation of that has to happen in all the fractal bodies of your being, not in just one. You can't solve this thing with spirituality. You cannot solve this thing with psychology. You cannot solve this thing alone with somatics. You have to understand that these bodies interlock and interact coherently and completely in one big moving field all the time. The path of power is the path of honesty. And until you have found clean honesty in all of those bodies, until there is right relationship in all of those places, one little chink in one body will ripple through all the others. It's the elegance of the system rather than being the problem. But our current method of treating and viewing this is that we use a singular intervention style in order to get at it. And instead, what we need to be looking at is the way they are all dancing. Because at any moment, the intervention or medicine may be in any one of those 5 to 8 bodies or expressions. And we won't necessarily know unless we learn to become attuned to the expression of the field itself. And when you attune to the expression of the field itself, you will be looking at 2 parallel nervous systems. One is the nervous system that has been formed to defend against, protect against, and also seek love, connection, intimacy, satiety, abundance. I hate to use that word because it's so misused, but anyway, hopefully you know that what I'm saying is the opposite of scarcity. And then on the other side of that, the other one doesn't give a shit about any of those things because the existence field is just pumping out creative, generative, vibrant energy. It just wants to create. It wants to connect. It wants to invent. It wants to make something new. It wants to repurpose. It just wants to go and do the thing. And from the perspective of the trauma nervous system, the emergent field represents the massive threat. Why? Because the emergent field is crazy, right? The emergent field is chaotic to the trauma body. The emergent field seems to want to take you in 50 directions, right? It wants you to like go to India or Hawaii, or it wants you to like, do something that seems like it just does not follow the rules. And there's this whole rule set that we have been given that says, if you follow these 10 rules, you will make it. And what we're finding, of course, now, and why there's 27 people at this intro talk, is that everybody fucking knows that those rules are not working. And that the formula that we were oversold somehow seems to be crumpling like below our feet, like in this moment. And so there must be this other way. And although there are many, many, many amazing ancient practices, that will help you understand how to get close to this other way. Many of them and all of them do not include the current moment of so many generations of oppressive systems where we have been entrained to believe things that aren't true, and that the freeing of us has to now happen in an environment in which scarcity is a big fucking reality. It's not just an idea, it is also like poverty. It is negligence, it's aloneness, it's isolation, it's misunderstanding. So we have to now do this thing in conditions that are seemingly completely wrong for it. And this, of course, makes it even harder. So there's two ways that we often go in that space. One is we collapse into victimhood, right? And everybody knows this, right? Every one of us has done this like 10 bazillion times as part of this path. Like just the one of breathing, that's the path I'm talking about. Like you get up, you start breathing, you know, collapse. So there's like the collapse of victimhood. And the other side of it that I speak about in this model is the control. So collapse and control in this model live on one continuum. On the left side, collapse is how you take yourself out when things seem to be hopeless and you don't have access to authority or power. On the other side is control. When you don't have access to authority or power, you start fundamentally manufacturing a false sense of access to authority and power. The whole world is doing this. And you'll notice that there's an oscillation between collapse and control. Sometimes there will be a center point that you will reach. And in that moment, you'll feel the verticality of being rooted down and up and in your own power or sense of voice and space and truth and resonance. But it usually won't last for long. And some of that is because things are always coming at us. And some of it is because things are always coming at us on the inside. And because we don't know that place as stable anymore. We now have habituated to collapse and control, and the linearity or the circularity of that being the thing that we do as part of the way we just exist. The tighter it is between collapse and control, the more you experience your own inner cycle of addiction. The more space there is between those two expressions or experiences, the less you will feel choked by the cycle of addiction. And for those who are new here, when I speak about addiction, I am not speaking about substances. Yes, of course, it includes that, but I'm speaking about something much, much larger than substances. I am speaking about the structure that I'm telling you about, that all of us have been touched by, because all of us have experienced 1 or 1,000 interruptions to love. And the way that at any moment love could be gone, safety could be gone, enough could be gone, connection could be gone, and our nervous systems are completely primed for it all the time. There's so many ways to define love. To me, I define love as being existence, which is not the human idea of existence. It's not the conceptual, it's the experience of existing, whether anybody notices your existence or not. It is also what I define as being power. And to me, it is from that generative, creative, fundamental source that is currently and always giving birth to life, as well as recycling life. I think that like 10 layers up from that is how we usually relate to love. And the ways we usually relate to love is, like I said about the primal body, it's whether you get touched enough. And touching isn't just physical touch, it's gaze, it's breath, it's syncing. Sometimes it's not syncing with the other, but it's dissonance in connection. These are basic, like infant bonding kind of things, even in the womb kind of bonding things. If you are in the womb of a mother and that mother is experiencing domestic violence, her body will be in restriction. It will be in a restriction of pleasure, satiety, safety, and ease. And that chemical and biochemical cocktail will transfer as information to the child growing in the mother. This is cellular information about baseline relating. This is why when we go to like blame our parents about things, it gets really complicated because pretty much everybody is already in a degree of restriction around these things because the lineage of lack of safety is so long in both men and women, in all beings. In some, obviously, it's more, they are currently under threat. But the remembrance of being under threat, even if it's not happening in the moment, is being transmitted as important information. When you have been deeply habituated into coercion or force as a motivator for action, you will be dancing with the body that is also in freeze. And it is your primal body that will be in freeze. It's your base, more like inner bodies that will be frozen. So even if you can move the outer layers above it, the inner layers will hold. And you may not even notice that holding. So a better ticket, good, you feel it, good. So a better aim is to bring really gently, and even better if you can get some assistance, even if the assistance is just somebody who holds your feet, like literally somebody who's close to you or just holds your feet, that you gently intend the breath, the softest, most gentle breath, to begin to touch the innermost layer. What will happen is that when the breath that is the right resonance makes contact with that innermost layer, it will begin to reanimate it. Now, this is a great thing, except that all hell will break loose when you do it. Because when you start reanimating the thing that has been in freeze for potentially 5 generations, like not even just you, but like lots of generations back, it is holding a lot of secrets. And it is usually holding a lot of rage and, of course, a tremendous amount of grief. This is why I almost always recommend that this be done with somebody else who is there. It's like the idea of using psychedelics with a sitter, a trip sitter. You don't even need this person to do anything, but it is really helpful to have another body on Zoom or in the room that can literally hold the field while you journey, because it will make it freer for you to take that journey and to touch those places. So that's option 1. Option 2, and also, is that you find somebody who has enough sight and perception to see and touch those places in you. And literally, one touch of the right spot has a tremendous ripple effect that does not go away. It's like the moment that you see the truth, you can no longer unknow it. It is the same with those places. Get ready for like howling and grieving and screaming and the whole thing. This is the reanimation and the refeeding in some ways of those places that have sometimes been dormant for a very long time. Fundamentally, my model is a systems model. It does not care about the people. Okay? It doesn't care about the people. It doesn't care about like the players. All it cares about is the interrelatedness of the system. That means it cares about the way the system is ordered, which I have not yet talked about, the way the system harmonizes. Notice I did not use the word cooperates, because lack of cooperation can also be harmony. So we've fantasized and romanticized this idea of we all get along. No. So we have to understand the way that the health of it does not depend on everybody accepting everybody else unconditionally. It does not depend on the fact that we all like each other. It doesn't depend on the fact that we all have the same values. It does depend on the fact that we know ourselves intimately enough in a moment-to-moment way so that we can speak from and live from what is honest. And what I mean by that, it is that our movements and choices and speaking is not so deeply occluded by the distortions of love that it prevents us from acting or manipulates action or engages action where action doesn't belong. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. Distortions to love will do one of three things, basically. They will withhold action, they will create manipulation of action, or they will engage action when action doesn't belong. You won't be able to stay with yourself, your deepest self. And that staying with yourself is what actually allows everything else to stay with itself and be itself in your presence so that it doesn't matter if you agree or not. So I'm going to go back to where I was, which is that this is fundamentally a systems model, and all systems model are relational because they understand that there is not one system, but this wider eco or economical system that is all dancing and interrelated all of the time, and that all effects have other effects on effects on effects. Our current system of psychotherapy is hyper individualized because we are in a culture of colonialism that basically says that we are one for ourselves. And that this distributed network of relationality is weaker, and that the idea of strength is this hyper individuality. We fight for ourselves, we gain, we take the thing. So our current model just follows that. And part of the problem, among thousands of other things with our current model, is that it doesn't move the needle in the primal body or the field of satiating the relational wounds. It can't. It just can't go there because its landscape is fundamentally flawed. Its understanding and its aim are fundamentally wrong.